when my daughter looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, you're just a foolish old woman who doesn't understand the world anymore." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I only smiled, the soft, quiet smile you give when something inside you breaks, but you refuse to let the pieces scatter across the floor for everyone to see. We were standing in the kitchen of the little blue house I had lived in for almost 50 years. The evening light was fading through the lace curtains. The soup on the stove was bubbling gently, and the smell of carrots and thyme filled the air like it always did on Tuesdays. Emily kept folding and unfolding a dish towel, her knuckles white. She was 38 years old, but in that moment, she looked like the little girl who once stood on a chair beside me to stir the same pot. She told me I was holding them back, that my forgetting little things like where I left my reading glasses, or whether I had already told the same story twice, meant I couldn't be trusted with bigger things anymore. She said the house was too large for one old lady, that the taxes and repairs were eating money they needed for the children's college funds. She said it would be kinder, easier, better for everyone if I moved into a nice place where people could look after me properly. A nice place. That was the phrase she kept using, as though repeating it would make it sound warmer. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I reached for the teapot, poured myself a cup with hands that trembled only slightly, and said, even though he had been gone for more than 30 years, laying on his bed and looking at humming lullabies. He grows into a woman who now looked at me as though I were a problem. I wasn't always, I was only quietly sad in a way that settles into your bones and stays there like an old friend you never invited back. My name is Eleanor Margaret Whitaker, though most folks around here just call me Ellie or Grandma. Ellie. I was born in the spring of 1943 in a small farming town about an hour outside the city. Our house was little more than a box with a tin roof, but it had a wide front porch where my mother shelled peas in the evenings and my father smoked his pipe after a long day fixing other people's tractors. We were poor the way many people were poor back then, poor in money but rich in everything else that mattered. There were 4 of us children, and I was the oldest. From the time I could hold a book, I loved stories. I read everything I could get my hands on, library books, seed catalogs, even the Bible stories my grandmother kept on the high shelf. My 3rd grade teacher, Miss Clara, used to say I had a mind too big for our little town. She gave me extra books and told me, "Eleanor, one day you're going to do something important." I believed her the way only children can believe. When I turned 18, I packed 1 cardboard suitcase, tied it with binder twine because the latch was broken, and took the Greyhound bus to the city with $47 sewn into the hem of my coat. My mother cried at the station. My father shook my hand like I was a grown man leaving for war. The city was loud and bright and frightening, but it felt like possibility. I rented a tiny room above a bakery and found work as a typist in a law firm downtown. 60 words a minute, no mistakes. The lawyers wore sharp suits and talked about things I had only read about in newspapers: rights, justice, fairness. I listened from my little desk in the corner, typing their letters, filing their papers, soaking it all in. One afternoon, the senior partner, Mr. Harlan, left a thick book on my desk. It was about constitutional law, heavy as a brick. "Read this when you have time, Miss Hayes," he said. I didn't have time. Not really. I worked all day and cleaned offices at night to make rent. But I read it anyway, late into the evenings by the light of a single bulb. When I finished it, I asked for another. Mr. Harlan smiled in a way that told me he had been waiting. "Why don't you study law yourself, Eleanor?" he asked. I laughed at first. A girl from the country with no money and no connections. But he didn't laugh. He lent me books, introduced me to professors who taught night classes, even paid for my first semester when I was too proud to ask. That it took me 7 long years. I worked days, studied nights, fell asleep on streetcars with casebooks open on my lap. My eyes burned, my back ached, but every page felt like stepping closer to something bigger than myself. In 1968, I passed the bar exam on the first try. Mr. Harlan shook my hand so hard I thought my fingers would bruise, and he said, "Now go out there and change the world, Miss Eleanor Hayes." I was 25 years old, and for the first time I believed I could. I did change a few small corners of it. I started with legal aid cases, people who couldn't afford fancy lawyers, families facing eviction because banks played tricks with paperwork, tenants living in buildings falling apart while landlords counted money. I stood in courtrooms where judges and opposing counsel looked at me like I didn't belong. A young woman in a second-hand suit with a country accent I couldn't quite hide, but I learned quickly that facts and truth don't care about accents. I won more than I lost. I learned to speak clearly, to stay calm when voices rose, to fight with words instead of fists. Then came the big case. It started small, like so many things do. A group of parents from the poorer side of town came to my office one rainy afternoon in 1970. They were black families, tired and determined, carrying folders of school bus schedules and report cards. Their children were being bused past clean, well-funded schools, too crowded, crumbling buildings miles away, all to keep the old lines of segregation in place, even after the laws said it shouldn't be that way anymore. "Miss Hayes," one mother said, her voice steady but her hands shaking, "our kids deserve better. They deserve the same chance as anyone else." I looked at those parents, thought of my own dreams as a child, and said yes. I took the case because it was right, even though I knew it would be hard. What began as a local lawsuit grew like a river after a storm. We won in district court, but the state appealed. We fought in the appellate court, and when we won there, they took it higher. Before I knew it, the case Hayes v. Board of Education had landed at the United States Supreme Court. Me, a small-town girl who once shelled peas on her mama's porch, was headed to Washington to argue before the 9 justices who shaped the nation. The day of the argument arrived in the fall of 1972. I remember every detail like it was etched in stone. Thomas drove me to the airport, Emily asleep in the back seat with her favorite stuffed bear. He kissed me goodbye and said, "You've got this, Ellie. Speak from the heart, like you always do." I boarded the plane with my briefcase heavy in my lap, my stomach twisting like a wet rag. Washington was crisp and golden that October, leaves crunching under my shoes as I walked up the marble steps of the Supreme Court building. It was enormous, white columns rising like giants, the words "Equal Justice Under Law" carved above the doors. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, smelling of polished wood and history. My heels echoed on the floor as I made my way to the courtroom. The room itself took my breath away. High ceilings, red velvet curtains, rows of wooden benches filled with lawyers, reporters, and spectators. The justices' bench loomed at the front, 9 empty chairs waiting. My hands were cold as I set up my notes at the podium. The parents from the case sat behind me, their faces a mix of hope and fear. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought of the children, the ones I had met, with their bright eyes and worn-out shoes, and the ones I hadn't, all across the country, waiting for doors to open. The justices entered, robes flowing, and everyone stood. Chief Justice Berger called the case. The state's attorney went first, arguing smoothly about budgets and traditions and how change would disrupt too much. I listened, making notes, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the microphone would pick it up. Then it was my turn. "Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I spoke about the Constitution, about the 14th Amendment's promise of equal protection. I told stories, not just facts, but real lives. A little boy riding a bus 2 hours each way past schools with new books and playgrounds, only to arrive at one with leaking roofs and outdated maps. "These children are not asking for special treatment," I said, looking each justice in the eye. "They are asking for the chance that every American child deserves: a fair start, a real education, without the shadow of old prejudices holding them back." Questions came fast. Justice Stewart leaned forward. "Miss Hayes, how do you reconcile this with local control of schools?" I answered calmly, citing precedents, weaving in the human cost. Justice Blackmun asked about implementation. "Won't this create chaos?" I replied with data from other districts, but also with heart. "Chaos is what these families live with now, Your Honor. True justice might be messy at first, but it's worth it for the future we build." For 30 minutes I stood there, fielding interruptions, building my case brick by brick. My knees shook under the podium, but my words flowed. I thought of my own Emily, safe at home, and how I wanted a world where every child like her and unlike her could dream big. When my time ended, I sat down, legs weak, hands damp. The courtroom buzzed quietly as the other side rebutted. Then it was over. We waited months for the decision. When it came unanimous in our favor, it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. Newspapers called it a landmark. Laws changed. Schools opened. But for me, it was those parents hugging me outside the courtroom, tears in their eyes, saying, "You gave our kids a chance." Thomas met me at the airport with flowers and Emily in a new dress. "My hero," he whispered. I laughed and said, "Just a mom doing what's right." But deep down, I knew it was the peak of something I never expected. Thomas. I still catch my breath when I say his name. He was a mechanic with gentle hands and a laugh that started deep in his chest. We met when my old Ford broke down outside the courthouse one rainy afternoon. He fixed it for free and asked if he could buy me coffee to make sure it started again. We married a year later, in the same little church my parents had married in. Emily arrived 2 years after that, red-faced and loud and perfect. Thomas said she had my stubborn chin. I said she had his kind eyes. We were both right. For a few years, everything felt golden. Then Thomas started losing weight, coughing at night, tiring to eyes. The doctor said cancer, aggressive, 18 months, maybe less. I watched the strongest man I knew shrink into someone who needed help to stand. I held his hand through treatments, read to him when he couldn't sleep, told him stories about the future we would still have. He died on a Tuesday morning in April with the window open so he could hear the birds. Emily was 6. I was 3. The world went quiet. I closed my downtown office, sold our pretty city house, bought the little blue house on Maple Street, back in my hometown because it had a big yard and good schools and a porch wide enough for rocking chairs. I wanted Emily to grow up with grass under her feet and neighbors who waved. I still practiced law, quietly taking cases from home, helping people who knocked on my door with problems too heavy to carry alone. But I never hung a shingle again. I never told Emily the full stories. I wanted her childhood to be light and ordinary. I wanted her to believe the world was mostly kind. She grew up thinking her mother was just a regular mom who baked cinnamon rolls on Saturdays and helped with science projects and sometimes disappeared into the study with stacks of papers. She never knew those papers changed lives. She never knew her mother had once stood in the highest court in the land. I told myself I was protecting her. Maybe I was only protecting myself from questions I wasn't ready to answer. Emily was bright and artistic. She drew beautiful pictures, wrote poems that made teachers cry, dreamed of studying graphic design. When she graduated high school, I cried harder than she did. She went to college 2 hours away, met David junior year, married him right after graduation in a backyard ceremony with fairy lights and sunflowers. They gave me Sarah first wild curls and a laugh like Belzand, then Jack, who has Thomas's smile and his quiet way of watching the world. For years, everything felt right again. Then David's company downsized. Bills piled up. Their little apartment felt smaller with 2 growing children. One Sunday after church, I said, "Why don't you all move in here? There's plenty of room." They hesitated at first, but I insisted. I loved hearing little feet running down the hall again. I loved cooking big pots of spaghetti and folding laundry that smelled like baby shampoo. For a long time, it was good. We were family, the way family is meant to be. But slowly, almost without noticing, things shifted. Emily started correcting me when I repeated stories. "Mom, you told us that one last week," she'd say with a tight smile. David muttered about the roof needing repairs we couldn't afford. Emily began looking up property values on her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. One night over dinner she said, "It seems silly for one person to rattle around in such a big house." I felt the words land heavy in my chest, but I only nodded and passed the potatoes. The small things grew bigger. She took the car keys for safety after I misplaced them once. She made doctor appointments I hadn't asked for. She left glossy brochures on the kitchen counter, pictures of smiling seniors playing cards in bright common rooms. Every time I said no, her face grew tighter. Every time I said this house is my home, her voice grew sharper. One rainy October evening, after the children were asleep, she sat me down at the kitchen table. The old wall clock ticked loudly in the quiet. She had papers in her hand, legal papers. "Mom, we're doing this because we love you," she began. Her voice shook a little. She wanted me to sign power of attorney over to her. She wanted to sell the house, pay off their debts, put the rest in a fund for my care. She wanted to move me into one of those nice places. When I asked for time to think, she said I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. When I said no, she said I was being selfish. When I still said no, she said, "You're acting like a foolish old woman who can't see what's best for anyone, not even herself." The words hurt more than anything physical ever could. I stood up slowly, excused myself, and went to my room. I closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed until the tears came. I cried without sound so no one would hear. The next weeks were cold in ways the weather couldn't touch. We spoke only when necessary. Meals were quiet. The grandchildren looked confused when their mother snapped at me for forgetting to buy milk. I spent more time in my room or on the porch, rocking slowly, watching seasons change. Emily hired a lawyer. Then she filed papers asking the court to declare me incompetent and grant her guardianship. My own daughter wanted legal control of my life, my home, my choices. When the summons arrived, I read it twice to be sure I understood. Then I called the only person I knew could help Mr. Harlan's nephew, Robert, who had taken over the old firm. I told him everything. I gave him a locked box from the back of my closet filled with yellowed newspaper clippings, certificates, letters from judges and senators. I said, "Use these only if you must." The morning of the hearing, I put on the navy suit I hadn't worn since Thomas's funeral. It still fit. My hands did not shake as I buttoned it. I drove myself to the courthouse because I wanted to arrive on my own terms. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Emily sat on the opposite side with her lawyer, eyes red, shoulders stiff. The judge entered, tall, white-haired, He sat, opened the file, and read my name aloud. Eleanor Margaret Whitaker. Then he paused. He looked at the page again, longer this time. He adjusted his glasses and looked up at me. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, surprise, maybe AI. He whispered something I couldn't catch. Emily's lawyer began. He spoke of memory lapses, unpaid bills, there were none. An incident with the stove, I had turned it off, but no one believed me. He painted a picture of a confused, elderly woman, unable to care for herself. I sat straight and listened without moving a muscle. When it was our turn, Robert stood. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "before addressing my client's current capacity, I asked permission to submit evidence of her lifelong accomplishments for context." He handed over the thick folder. The judge opened it. Page by page, he turned front-page stories, photographs of a younger me outside marble buildings, awards, the Supreme Court opinion with my name in bold. When he reached the transcript of my closing argument, he read silently for a long time. Then he looked up at me again. "Ms. Hayes," he said softly, using my maiden name like it was sacred. "Eleanor Hayes, it is an extraordinary honor." Emily turned to me, confusion written across her face. "Mom," the judge did not wait for questions. He told the courtroom who I was. He told them about the quiet country girl who became a lawyer when almost no women did. He told them about the cases no one else would touch. He told them about the day I stood before the highest court in the land and helped change history. He spoke with quiet reverence, the way people speak of heroes they never expected to meet. Emily's face went pale. Her hands began to shake. Tears filled her eyes, but they were different tears now. The judge looked at her gently, but firmly. "Mrs. Thompson, your mother possesses one of the sharpest legal minds this state has ever known. If anyone in this room is competent, tually, unquestionably competent to she." He tapped the gavel so softly, it barely made a sound. "Petition denied, with prejudice, and Mrs. Whitaker, the honor is truly mine." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Emily stood. She walked across the aisle like she was moving through deep water. When she reached me, she collapsed into my arms and cried the way she hadn't cried since she was small, great, heaving sobs that shook us both. I held her the way I always had, one hand on her back, rocking slightly, whispering that it was all right now, everything would be all right. We drove home without speaking much. The rain had stopped and the world smelled fresh and new. When we walked into the house, she asked if she could make tea. I said yes. We sat at the same kitchen table where so many hurts had happened, and she cried while the kettle whistled. "I didn't know." She kept saying, "Mom, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." I took both her hands in mine. "You never asked, sweetheart, and I never told. We both made mistakes." That night we talked until dawn. I told her everything about the fear and the triumphs. The threats I never mentioned, the nights I cried alone after hard cases, the pride I felt watching her grow even when I stayed quiet about my own past. David came in at some point and listened from the doorway, eyes wide. The grandchildren woke and crawled into our laps like nothing had changed. Healing didn't happen in a single day. Deep wounds never do. There were awkward weeks, careful conversations, apologies offered and accepted in layers. But something fundamental shifted forever. Emily started calling me mom again, with warmth in her voice. She asked my opinion on everything from school choices to recipes. She read every article about my old cases until she could recite parts of them. Sometimes she would find me in the kitchen and hug me from behind, resting her cheek against my shoulder for no reason at all. One Saturday, the following spring, we planted tulips along the front walk. The earth was cool and rich under our fingers. Emily knelt beside me in the dirt and said quietly, "I almost took your home from you." I brushed soil from her cheek the way I used to when she was small. "No, darling," I said, "you almost took yourself from my home. That would have been the real loss." Years have passed since then. I am older now, truly older. My steps are slower, my knees complain on cold mornings. Some names slip away like smoke, but Emily never doubts my mind again. When I misplaced my glasses, she laughs and says, "Your brain is just making room for all the wisdom still in there." The grandchildren know the stories now. They call me Grandma Ellie the hero and beg to hear about the day I talked to the big judges in Washington. I tell them heroes are just ordinary people who keep showing up, keep caring, keep trying. On quiet evenings, I still sit on the wide front porch in the old rocking chair. Emily often joins me with 2 mugs of tea. We rock side by side and watch the sky turn pink and gold. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we simply listen to crickets and distant lawn mowers and the soft sounds of a life still being lived. I have learned many things in my long years, but perhaps the most important is this. We think we know the people closest to us, but every single one carries hidden worlds inside. My daughter thought she was saving me when she was really pushing me away. I thought I was protecting her by hiding my light, when all she needed was to see it shine. If there is someone older in your life, your parent, your grandparent, the quiet neighbor down the street, with them, ask who they were before they were old. Ask what they dreamed of, what broke their hearts, what made them strong again. Listen as though their stories matter, because they do. One day they will be gone, and you will wish with every beat of your heart that you had asked sooner. I am an old woman now. Yes, my hair is white, my hands are spotted, my reflection surprises me sometimes, but I am not foolish. I am full of days lived deeply, full of love given and received, full of stories that still matter. This little blue house on Maple Street, with its creaky porch and its garden full of memories and tulips we planted together, is still my home. It always will be. And as long as I have breath, I will sit here rocking gently, smiling at the sky, knowing that every crack in my heart let more light in. That, my dear friends, is the truest thing I know.